Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives.
Keith Abraham. Keith Abraham is a UK combat veteran and CEO of Heroic Hearts Project UK, a charity aimed at helping UK military and emergency services veterans gain access to psychedelic therapy. Keith, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Psyched. I think you're on mute, Keith. Keith, we can't hear you. Keith, we cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
Yep, we can hear and see you.
Thank you for your patience. It logged me out just as you were introducing me, so apologies, but thank you for your patience. So hello, good afternoon or good morning to those of you in the US that are joining us this early. As I was already introduced, my name is Keith Abraham and I'm a UK military combat veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm now also the CEO of a new charity, Heroic Hearts UK, or its full name, Heroic Hearts Project UK. And it's a charity aimed at helping UK military and emergency services veterans gain access to psychedelic therapy. But before we get on to talk about who we are at Heroic Hearts and what we do, I'd like to spend a few minutes just talking about why we do the work that we do and why I do the work that I do. And it happens that today is actually the 12-year anniversary of the deaths of two of my good friends in Afghanistan. And it was a desperately traumatic experience for everyone involved and everyone affected by it. And no one involved will ever be forgetting it. And unfortunately, it was one of many, many such experiences that we had during that tour of duty in 2008. And so it was a very difficult period for me personally in that time. And when I got home from Afghanistan back to the UK, I began to exhibit symptoms of intense anxiety and depression. And I approached the military and asked for whatever help they could provide for me. And I suppose very similar to most civilians as well, at least here in the UK, really you only get two options. And one was pharmaceuticals, antidepressants, and the other was psychotherapy, so talking therapies. And the talking therapies were useful, they were beneficial, but I wouldn't be able to say that they were actually healing me of my anxiety and depression, and maybe even it was PTSD. And the pharmaceuticals definitely didn't sit well with me. I tried a couple of times and my body was rejecting them. So it was quite clear that those two courses were no longer viable to me, and that I would either have to just endure this experience or find another way to work through it. And after a few years, I kind of became aware that my time in the military was coming to an end. And so I left and I managed to get a job at JP Morgan, which is a large investment bank. And I worked at their London branch in Canary Wharf. And leaving the military, and I was part of a combat unit, leaving a combat unit and moving into the corporate sector, and particularly for JP Morgan, I swapped one really intense environment for another one. And investment banking definitely wasn't conducive to my well-being, and it certainly didn't help with my easing of my symptoms of this anxiety and depression. And so it was during that time that I went to a memorial service. And during this service, I was placing down my poppies and my wreaths to remember my fallen friends. And I remember looking across the square, and I saw a really old veteran, a World War II veteran, maybe like 80 or 90 years old, and he was really crying hysterically at the graveside. And it was heartbreaking, really, really heartbreaking to watch this old man suffering so much. But really, it was a huge catalyst for me personally, and a big wake-up call, because looking at him in that state of trauma, I realized that if I wasn't careful, if I didn't do something about myself pretty soon, I could easily become that guy. Again, 80, 90 years old, maybe even approaching my deathbed, I could still be traumatized by my warfighting experiences, even though decades may have passed by the time of that experience. So I realized pretty quickly that I had to take some fairly drastic steps. But I didn't really know what those drastic steps might be. But two things happened. First thing was that I was actually introduced to the internal martial arts, which is things like Tai Chi and associated practices like Qigong and meditation. And I still practice those every day to this day. And now I even teach as well. And I found that they really helped on a daily basis. They really helped heal me from my anxiety and depression and my mental traumas. The second thing that I did was I took myself off to Peru, took a flight out to the Peruvian jungle to a town called Tarapoto. And I got on a boat and I traveled way down this river for a couple of hours downriver to a small, tiny little village in the middle of the jungle. And I was directed towards a little hut in the middle of the jungle with no running water, just a river nearby, no electricity. I had to take my own drinking water and food and sleeping equipment with me. And I spent, I think it was about 10 days in that hut. And during those 10 days, the local shaman from the nearby village, he came and visited me and provided me with my first experiences of ayahuasca. And much like many people on this conference listening today who have experienced ayahuasca, we know that everything changes after these experiences. And I was certainly no different. I walked out of that jungle a very different man to the one that I walked in. And really, ever since then, that was in 2014, ever since then, I've been trying to find a way where I could help other veterans, not just military, but I'm keen to introduce this across the spectrum to emergency services veterans as well. But all this time, I've been trying to find this way of introducing this therapy as a viable, credible, safe, and most importantly, really, is effective form of therapy to veterans. Because here in the UK, I think we're certainly a few steps behind our brothers and sisters in the United States in the conversation of the benefits and the power of psychedelic therapy. And for the longest period in between, so since 2014 and really the last year, the conversation has been stunted. It's there, the community is there, but it hasn't really reached mainstream at all yet. And so within the last 12 months, I actually was introduced to a guy called Jesse Gould, who's the founder of Heroic Hearts Project in the US, and he's also due to talk later on this at this conference. So please take the time to hear him talk as well, because he's a fantastic guy to listen to. And so Jesse and I began to talk, and I mentioned to him that I'd really kind of like to do everything that he was doing. I'd like to do it here in the UK. And he very kindly suggested that instead of me having to try and set up everything from scratch, he suggested that I take the Heroic Hearts brand and set it up here in the UK, which is exactly what we've been doing these last few months. And our charitable status is still under review because we've just submitted recently to the Charities Commission. So we're not technically a registered charity yet, but we are up and running. The website's up and running. I've got an incredible team around me, a really incredible team that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And so yeah, that's where my journey. That's the why I find myself as CEO of this new charity. And really, the who. I'd like to just talk about the who now. Who are we made up of? We've got a lot of veterans on the team. I'm a veteran, of course, but we've also got two of our trustees are veterans. One is also a member of Parliament, who's a very powerful ally for us. A member of Parliament for a place called Reigate here in the UK, and he's also actually a co-chair for the all-party parliamentary group on drug policy reform. So again, a very powerful ally who's already well on side with the idea of psychedelic therapy and the rescheduling of drugs here in the UK, because so many of the drugs that have been banned by Schedule 1 have been found to have no medicinal purpose at all, and that's just not based on any science. It's just archaic. And so we're really now trying to, with guys like Crispin, our trustee, this MP, we're really trying to move it into the government's awareness that we really need to try and rethink this policy and open these substances up to clinical research, which is part of our aim as a charity, is to promote research into these substances, specifically psilocybin and ayahuasca. But here in the UK, psilocybin is definitely a few steps further down the path than ayahuasca. And so another one of our trustees is a guy called Ollie Ollerton, who is a UK Special Forces veteran, but he's also a TV show host. He hosts a show called SAS, Who Dares Wins, and it's kind of a reality TV show about testing civilians and famous people and putting them under the testing them in the ways that our special forces test applicants. But what's really interesting about Ollie is that Ollie took himself off to Costa Rica and has recently had himself experiences with ayahuasca that have also been profoundly life-changing for him. So we've got another really powerful ally in the media here talking openly about his experiences with psychedelic therapy. Another one of our trustees is Charlotte Walsh, who's an academic lawyer who's focused also on drug policy reform. So we're in good shape here with our trustees, and we've also got a fantastic advisory board that consists of a wonderful professor of psychopharmacology. We've got a doctor of psychiatry who also has personal experience of the use of psychedelics, and we've also got Rob Laurie, who's our legal advisor as well. I believe he's also talking at this conference, so he'd also be a very interesting person to listen to if you get the chance. So that's the who. We've got other guys working with my intimate team, mostly all veterans as well, but those are the big names and very powerful allies, as I've said. So what do we do? What is it that we do at Heroic Hearts UK? Like I said at the beginning, we aim not just at military veterans, but also at emergency services veterans, which is different to our American charity, the version that Jesse set up. Because of the sheer numbers involved in the US, it's hard to really open up the charity to too large a group, because of the sheer numbers involved. The US military is enormous compared to the UK. So I wasn't too afraid of being overwhelmed by applications from UK military veterans, hence decided to open it up to emergency services veterans too, because we suffer similar traumas in our professional careers, so it seemed wise to me. And also the reason why we don't have, I'm not so scared of being overwhelmed by applicants, is because the conversation, the debate on psychedelic therapy is really a few steps behind that in the US. Really, so many people here in the UK aren't particularly convinced by the benefits. Despite the science that's being released, it's hard to get it out into the mainstream and convince these guys that this is, like I said before as well, credible and safe, but also effective, that this actually works. And instead of having to rely on pharmaceuticals, which normally makes a lot of people feel worse, and psychotherapy that certainly has its benefits, definitely when combined with psychedelic therapy. Really, it's hard to find someone that could admit that they've been healed by psychotherapy alone. And yet these are the only two options that most of us here in the UK are offered when we start presenting ourselves to our GP, to our doctors, and if we've got these mental traumas. So the debate is a little bit farther behind than the US, but I think with conferences like this today and with our work at Heroic Hearts UK, we're really aimed at trying to get out into the communities, into the veterans communities, also into Parliament, into government, but also into the big academic institutions around the UK, and offering ourselves as collaborators and offering our links to veterans that we might be able to collaborate in clinical research, or presenting ourselves as evidence to government to try and convince them that this is worth doing. And really, I've been quite shocked at the momentum that we've been gathering. I think I submitted our charitable application to the Commission maybe about 3 weeks ago. And in that 3 weeks, I've been shocked by some of the contacts that we've been talking to in government, but also in those big academic institutions. So it's really an exciting time here in the UK. It feels inevitable that this rescheduling will occur, certainly of perhaps MDMA and psilocybin. Maybe ayahuasca is a little bit further behind, but because it's my own personal, I have such a personal attachment to it, then I'm going to certainly do my best to begin researching more into the benefits of ayahuasca on veterans suffering from anxiety, depression, PTSD and such. So yeah, our work really, that's two of our aims there is research, but also raising awareness. But really our primary goal is to just offer the opportunities of healing now to veterans who are suffering now, and not wait for the rescheduling of these drugs, of these substances. So we are facilitating opportunities for military and emergency services veterans to go abroad and as a collective, as a group, and join psychedelic therapy retreats, either be that in Peru or Costa Rica, or also we're doing psilocybin retreats over in Amsterdam. Obviously not just yet, we've got to wait for the lockdown to be eased, but plans are in place and the retreat centres have all been vetted, and so we're in a very good place to start offering these opportunities to veterans now, as I say, and that's important for us to do it now, because guys are suffering and have been suffering for a long time, and we can't wait anymore for the rescheduling of these substances. So we're happy to act now, and we're convinced that we're going to provide a lot of healing, or help introduce guys to have these healing experiences. So just before I open this up to question and answer session, I just want to confirm that the website is up and ready, and you can have a little look at that. It's heroicheartsuk.com. The email address is info@heroicheartsuk.com, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook only at the moment, and that's @heroicheartsuk. So yeah, please follow us, like us. You can donate to us still, even though we're not a registered charity. You can make a donation to us, and it goes via the the US charity, but all donations received from the UK will be used only for UK veterans. So please have a little look, let us know what you think, follow us on social media, and if you want to donate, And perhaps if anyone's so inclined, you can also volunteer. Our charity in the US has got an ambassador program. So that might be something that a lot of people out there in the US might be interested in looking at. Okay, so I think there's a few chats that have come up. So I'm just going to have a little look around and see what questions there might be. Yeah, I see that the links have all been shared.
Yep. I'm going to come online and ask a couple of questions if that's okay with you.
Cool.
Yeah, so well, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us, Keith. Really appreciate it. Really incredible and important work that y'all are doing. I'd love to, get some perspectives, for instance, in terms of timeline, right? So, we're at a point where veterans are becoming more aware of these types of treatments, but we're still not necessarily at a point where we can openly, I guess, talk to governments about, government sponsorship of these types of programs, or maybe we're at the very beginnings of those discussions. How many years down the road do you see, government really embracing these types of treatments and modalities and saying, this is something that's available to all our veterans, it's something that's government sponsored?
Yeah, good question. I'm actually shocked by my own view on this, because I went into this thinking that this is a long, long way down the road. I actually think that COVID and this pandemic is actually creating an environment where this could actually move things along a little bit quicker. Because the way that I see it is that the government, one, we're going to be looking at going into a recession, a financial recession, and so governments are going to be looking at how do they start putting impetus into our economy and really regulating psychedelics, probably starting with cannabis because it's already been open to clinical trials, but it's a way to start monetizing and taxing these substances that the government, rightly or wrongly, whatever your views on it, that's what the government are going to be looking at to put impetus into our economies. This is one route, one possible route in. So I think that actually gets us further down the road, this need for impetus into the economy. I think that's one thing that's going to bring it closer. And the other thing is the mental health aspect of this pandemic. That there's a lot of people that are struggling with being locked down, and the government are quickly becoming very aware of this. And they're also becoming aware, at least in the conversations that I've been having and that my team members have been having with some of the government, or at least their advisors, is that they're aware that most of the opportunities, the options currently available, they're aware that they're not really working. It's quite clear that they're not really working, and that they need some good news. They need a big win, and psychedelics could provide them with this big win. So the government is, from what I'm beginning to understand, is becoming more and more open, specifically because COVID has presented this sort of perfect storm that actually becoming a catalyst for something that actually might be very beneficial for the psychedelic community and then wider society.
Mm-hmm. The second question I wanted to ask has to do with, we've heard a little bit about government programs that are specifically, trying to experiment with psychedelic therapy so that they can basically, send individuals out into combat, be able to bring them back and then help them heal, and then be able to prepare them to go back into combat. And so, that's something that I think a lot of folks in the community are wondering about is, should we be continuing to provide and form partnerships with government when oftentimes government, especially kind of military forces, might be using these types of technologies to actually push combat and that agenda forward, and using these medicines to be able to actually further those initiatives instead of actually kind of reeling back and focusing more on de-escalation?
I find that odd. Not just because of my political views, that is odd personally, but also anyone that has taken psychedelics, you'd be hard pressed to find someone that would actually want to go back into combat. I mean, I have renounced violence as the best that I can. I no longer believe that violence is the answer to resolving our problems in this modern world. And that is really largely down to my experiences with ayahuasca and psilocybin. So I find it odd that it would be offered to soldiers in the hope that you could heal them from one combat experience and then get them into a place where you could put them into another combat experience. I just don't see that actually in reality, a soldier would be, I think it would be dangerous for the military to do that, because I think that people would leave the military. I think that they would see that their lives are no longer conducive to their well-being to be in the military, having had that experience. Obviously, there are still many people that see a benefit in being in the military. My son's one of them, but not after you've had psychedelics. That strikes me as really not sustainable and odd, and bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm right.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because, you know, there's been so many of the individuals, you know, at this conference, kind of in the more mainstream psychedelics community, have had these profound experiences of unification and overwhelmingly positive experiences when it comes to psychedelics. But we know these kind of like really dark stories about how psychedelics have been used throughout history to, you know, militarize, to promote violence, you know, kind of the Charles Manson, you know, using LSD to reenact the crucifixion of Christ, putting himself on the pedestal and then convincing his, you know, group of folks to go and kill individuals, right? So there does seem to be at least examples throughout history where psychedelics have been used to militarize, to create more feelings of aggression against specific demographics. You know, in that case, it was the wealthy and the rich and the famous. But I can definitely also see, you know, the possibility for actually increasing aggression towards demographics. For instance, you know, political enemies of a government. Is that something that you see as being, you know, realistic? And if not, why not? And if yes, what are some things that we can do to prevent that?
So of course, there's always going to be examples throughout history that we can find, and there will always be these strange, I would call them strange occurrences, where people use psychedelics to actually become more violent and more aggressive towards any demographic. But I think the overwhelming experience is one of complete opposite to that. So I'm aware of those things. I'm aware that the military, at least the US military, conducted studies in the past. But I think when you take this and look at it as society-wide, really the overwhelming evidence is that the vast majority of people, you're going to get a deeper connection to yourself, to the natural world, and then in turn to your community. So I could be very wrong, I just think going on the majority experience throughout human history using these substances, the vast majority of it has been to the great benefit of mankind. And of course, there are opportunities for abuse, and there are other opportunities. There are other ways of abusing these things that's been discussed in the press at the moment as well. But I think the overwhelming majority evidence is one of great benefit to mankind and society. So personally, I'm not overly worried about it, and I hope I'm just not very wrong.
Definitely. Yeah, well, Keith, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and insights. We really appreciate it, and are going to be looking forward to all the great work Heroic Hearts is going to be doing.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to talk. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.